The point where we're standing here on the Stones River, this is the East Fork. If you were coming in by canoe, you could come from the East Fork Recreation Area and come down to the town of Old Jefferson there. On the bank here that you see over my shoulder, this was a location of the dam and also the mill. See, originally, back in the early 1800s, Shelton Crosswaite family owned this plantation here, and they built the first mills located here. Later on, there was a house located on that bank also, occupied by the family brother to Sam Davis, and this became known as the Ridley Davis Mill at that time, later part of 1800s. The point where we're standing here on our trip into the site of Old Jefferson is on the roadbed that leads generally toward the west. You can still see some of the asphalt here and the rocks that are left after the lake came in, after the Corps of Engineers built the lake back in the early 60s. Off to the west here, about another 3/8 of a mile, we'll come to the site of Old Jefferson. The river, which is to our north here, this is still the West Fork of the river where we're standing here. In the summer, where the water comes to a higher level, this actually is a cove, and this fills up with water. Now, in the wintertime here, we're in the early spring. It's very much like it was back in the days before the lake was actually built. As we are looking at this road, this was called the Jefferson Pike to us in the 1900s. Back in the early days, it was referred to the old Georgia Road. At some places, they call it the Augustine Road. It runs from Milton, Auburntown, going east through Lascassas, Walter Hill, Jefferson, and then continuing on to the west and ties in with the old Nashville Highway on the south side of Laverne. The area that we're looking here is looking east toward the road that we came in on. This comes from the area of Milton, Walter Hill, into Old Jefferson, and it continues on to the west. We've crossed the East Fork Bridge over on the east side, and as we are standing here in the center of the town of Old Jefferson, as it was in the 60s before the lake came, we had the major part of the town was centered at this point. Coming up here, as you're looking here, would be on the looking south. This road here was never paved. I always referred to it as the Creatures Ford Road. It goes for about 1.25 miles, crosses the West Fork of the Stones River, and ties in with Florence Road, and Florence Road goes on over to the Florence Station, where a lot of the farm products, starting when the railroad was actually built in 1851, various products could be hauled across the river and then on Florence Road and loaded onto the train at that point. Where we're standing, just to the right, the store, the Eads store, when the lake came in the mid 1960s, 67, the store had been located in that spot. As we pan around, there were houses going down each side of these roads down to the bottom of the hill. Now we're looking pretty much toward the west. The west goes on toward Gillsville, what we know as Gillsville today. It crossed the bridge down there at the West Fork and continued on, and ultimately crossed the southern part of the Air Force Base and tied in with the old Nashville Highway that led into Laverne. As we're standing here in the center part of what was Old Jefferson, site of Old Jefferson, I have my back to the west. The main flow of the river, where the two rivers came together, was just immediately to the north here. The West Fork and the east, the West and East Fork came together at this juncture. Now the town itself was actually born out of necessity during the 1800s, the early 1800s. Tennessee had become a state in 1796, and the counties lying around us, Davidson, Sumner County, as well as Wilson and Williamson County, had already come into existence. So the people living in this area, they had started to flow in during the latter part of the 1700s and 1790s, Uriah Stone with a surveying group. They'd come in the about 1767, and he'd surveyed the river area. And when he came to this point, ultimately the river was to receive his name. So when the petition was made by the local people here in the area that was to become relative to Jamaica County in 1803, there was a need for a county seat. And the two fellows, Weekly and Bedford, they had already purchased part of the land grant that had belonged to James Pearl, which extended roughly from the Nice's Mill downstream on the West Fork and included this area here at the junction, and then even farther to the north. So with that then, they very quickly laid out what ultimately became 162 building lots, or lots that they expected people to live on, and it was centered in this area that we're standing right now. You see, immediately to the north was the part that was called the main square, and when they laid out the city or the town that was going to be here, they had a square. In that square there was a public building that was used for government. There was a jail. On the east side of the square itself, there was a huge hotel called the Reed Hotel. But one of the most important aspects of this was a roadway that led from the square down to a path or a roadway that went down to the edge of the river. We will move over to that point in just a few minutes to show how the town of Jefferson was really born out of a need to have an area for shipping and transporting farm and forest products out of this area. The part of the Jefferson story where we're standing now is part of the roadway that led from the square, the north side of the square at Old Jefferson, the town, came down the hill to the north. Over my shoulder here is north, where the two rivers actually come together. This particular place where we're standing, there's a fence on either side, and along each side of the road, back in the early 1800s, there were various kinds of shacks and buildings, warehouses, if you will, where various kinds of products were stored until the right time was set for launching the flatboats. In the meantime, there were men who were actually building the flatboats here. Back of me along the river was the area where the docks were actually built, the flatboats were built, and the people would sit and wait. They would keep collecting the products, and then when the river would get to the right height or level that it could float, they would know that it would be safe to set sail or to set out on the flatboat. This would be the waiting period right in this area right here. The point where we're standing here is the junction between the two rivers, the West Fork and the East Fork, that you can see over my shoulder here. The loading areas that were used for the wharfs and docks for the town of Jefferson would have been farther out in the stream here. You've got to picture in your mind that this is Percy Priest as it is today. And the river itself was two much smaller streams. So the products would be brought down in this lane that we came down and loaded onto the wharfs here. Farther to the north here, as we go down the stream here, this would be heading generally to the north and northwest toward the Nashville area. It passes in the area of the Jefferson Pike, then goes on down to Bates Sanders boat area, and then on to the northwest toward the Cumberland River down at Nashville. What we're looking at here is the West Fork of Stones River. West Fork comes from the central and southern part of the county and sweeps this way toward the north. It comes here and ties in with the main river here at the junction, right next to the site of Old Jefferson. From there it goes north toward Nashville. This is the roadway that was part of the main road system that led east and west. Part of what we knew as the Jefferson Pike. Over on the East Fork was a similar type of, there was a bridge across each of the two Rivers. If you were interested in traveling to the town of Old Jefferson, the site that came into existence back in 1803, there are several ways that you could do that. One would be coming from the West Fork recreation area, which is pretty much straight to the west here. You could come from the main stream, which this large stream coming here from the Jefferson boat dock area down on Jefferson Pike. You could come from the East Fork Recreation area by boat, or you could come on foot from that area. There's a footpath leading in all the way in from the recreation area into the center of the town of Old Jefferson.